This morning's Dharma talk is rather timely, I think. Not something I've talked about before, but I think it needs to be covered a little bit anyway. And so because there's several different aspects to this, they go different directions, I'm not going to leave it up to my memory to make sure I covered everything. So I'm going to read a little bit of what I intended to talk about. And then I'll talk a little bit more on after this. And then I highly, highly recommend that you ask questions. Don't leave me hanging up here by myself, please. It's so lonely. Your civic duty. Interesting thing to be coming from this particular direction, but it needs to be discussed. First of all, it is your civic duty to vote. Don't argue about that. And why do I say that? To participate in your community and culture, even though you may feel unsupported by its form, structure, and shortcomings. You are not on a mountaintop in ancient China. You are here right now. Participate. It is your civic duty to protect the health of your sangha, your family and community, which includes the entire humanity of the world. It is your civic duty to put the welfare of others at least equal with your own, and perhaps even before your own. It would be very situational. And if you're training your mind, you'll know when that is appropriate and when it is not. It will be choiceless. Or not. It is your civic duty to train your mind, so the lack of training, it is your civic duty to train your mind. Listen to this closely. You should ask questions about this, hopefully. So the lack of training or confusion in your mind, your hidden bias and prejudice is always hidden. Quite often we hear people say, I'm not prejudiced. Well, I can tell you right now, I am prejudiced. You'd have questions about that. If you don't, then you're probably prejudiced. So we have something in common. It's your civic duty to train your mind so the lack of training or confusion in your mind, your hidden bias and prejudice are exposed, not gotten rid of. That's a misunderstanding. You can't get rid of that. If you think you can, it's like meditating away your ears. What is all this? I don't need all this extra stuff. I'll meditate, that'll fall off, and then I'll just have alien ears. That might take a few billion years. No pun intended. That way, any fear-based convictions, ideas, opinions, and false understanding are not spread out into the world as facts, thereby adding to the rampant confusion that shows up everywhere in this material realm we call samsara. Train your mind to see clearly so that before you open your mouth and express more confusion, you will be aware of that and you'll be responsible for the confusion. It's not about getting rid of anything. You don't have to get rid of anything. It's pretty difficult to get rid of stuff anyway. Don't rely on guesswork to guide your life. Train your mind to see the truth. Don't cover it up with opinions. Find a true path that seems to make sense to you, sometimes called a spiritual path, since the emphasis is on others, on helping others, not just on your own petty issues and mundane concerns. Not that you wouldn't have a lot, of course. You need to have a job, you need to feed yourself, you need to take care of yourself. So that's all I had there written down. So it is your If you're part of a community, then you need to, I need to, we need to participate in that community enough so that we are at least, there's some kind of communication happening there. Voting is communication. It may not be the ideal kind, but it never is. Communication is always a misunderstanding. That's why it's called communication. If communication always worked and always was completely lacking in any kind of preconception that replaces the actual original intention of the communication, then we wouldn't have any issue at all. We wouldn't have to even talk. So in your particular situation, it may be necessary for you to participate more in your community. You may need to run for office. I think that would be up to you. I'm not going to encourage anybody to do that. You may need to have a job. You may need to become a monk. That is your business, not mine. If you make it my business, I'll help you, but only with your permission. No encouragement to do that. The only thing I encourage you to do, and everyone, whether you're Buddhist or not, makes no difference from this perspective. Train your mind so that you see, so that you just don't rely on your opinions, your conclusions, your frozen areas of the mind that are too uncomfortable to explore. It's uncomfortable. I know about that. That's why I'm able to do this. And of course, I'm biased in this area. I say, this is the way I think that it's best to train your mind. But I'm not saying there isn't maybe some other way. Perhaps. But if you sit down and hold very still and just watch what continues to move, the very nature of your consciousness will begin to reveal to you, and different with everyone, the way in which you're covering things up, the way in which you're turning away from certain aspects of your mind stream, your consciousness, your karma, the causes and conditions that arise as everything from the shape of your ears to the speed with which you process information in a conceptual manner, the speed and the texture with which you process information in an intuitive manner. Those are actually not separate, but they are quite often separated because, why? Because ego needs control. I'm not talking about the flamboyant ego that everyone thinks someone is egotistical. I'm talking about those very subtle areas of me, and my stuff, my ideas, my position, my understanding. Me. You don't have to get rid of it, but it might be a very good idea to be aware of how deeply entrenched you are, or I am, or anyone is in their self-centeredness, in their narcissism. So any questions about this, the statement there, your civic duty? Should have a few around that, since I rarely use those words, if ever.
I'm bowing.
Yes, sir.
Something that I really struggle with is not shutting down with people that have different ideas about what that is. So how do we communicate when somebody's convictions are contrary to our own? Bowing.
Well, it's very situational. Thank you for that question. It's very situational, but it is always about receiving. And the receiving happens several different ways. Eventually, it'll just happen one way. And that one way we can talk about later if you want. But initially on the path, since you're on the path, is to receive what is showing up as their expression that you are assuming is or are responding to in your own mind stream as crazy or confused or self-centered or bigoted, or could go on and on. But notice what arises. Watch the movement that comes as their expression or their language or their words or their commentary or their whatever they're promoting, their propaganda to themselves and to you. So first receive that. then receive your response to it. In other words, watch how you respond negatively, positively, or maybe neutrally, or maybe just not wanting to think about it, not wanting to look at it. Watch the way that you do. So you're receiving what's showing up on the so-called outside, and you're receiving what is showing up on the so-called subjective area. You're watching those move. They look very separate. But you can't have the ones coming up in your mind stream. You can't have that coming up in your mind stream without that coming up in the so-called out there objective stream. This is a very, very, very fine level of teaching. If you're a student, then that will be a teaching. And I could elaborate a little bit. I could say, if you really see deeply into what's coming towards you, and you see deeply into your response to it, and the way in which your response to it is actually mirroring what's coming towards you, it's called warfare. If you see that, then you won't go to war. You do not have to stop that feeling. That's a misunderstanding. To think you have to stop feeling that way. This is a directly connected to the imputation, the belief that you are somebody, that you're a separate being who shouldn't feel that way. And then you notice that commentary coming up. And then you may, if you see really deeply, if you're able to get through the situation of not responding, not attacking, not disagreeing with, not agreeing with, not doing anything with it, give them a lot of eye contact. And maybe you could tilt your head to one side twice. And if they say, "Are you listening to me?" Say, "Of course." And then you repeat everything they said. So where I was going with that is the next thing that you may see is, as you listen, if you don't accept it and you don't reject it and you don't ignore it, that means you're also not accepting, rejecting, or ignoring what is arising in your own mind stream that is triggered by what they're saying. If you're not doing any rejecting anywhere in yourself or at them or with them or around them, you just see what it is, then you will see how much they're suffering. And that's how they cover up their suffering. When you begin to see that, it becomes obvious why people are insane. Is because that's how you get out of the nerve endings in the mind stream, and the emotions. Get away from that being so painful or so threatening or so fearful. These people who charge into Lansing with looking all scruffy and with their military stuff on, with their big long guns and so on, threatening the governor and so on. These people are fear. There's fear that motivates that. It's that's the whole thing about macho stuff, men and their control modalities that have been going on forever.
Shadow bowing.
Yes.
In that situation you brought up with like the people going to the Capitol, and
Yes.
they might say that they're protecting something or even putting the welfare of other people for themselves.
Yeah.
So what is it to actually do that? That's to put others before yourself. That's not out of that position.
Well, fundamentally, it's to mind your own business. I mean, in a fundamental way. And I don't mean to be sarcastic. That might, by actually minding your own business, just watching your own mind stream. That's what I'm saying. Mind your mind stream. Watch your mind stream that reacts to that without shutting it down. Oh, I can't feel that way. That's just as bad as they are. You might need to feel exactly as bad as they do. You might need to actually resonate with the desire to, which is what they want to do. They want to kill her. They want to get rid of their emotions, their feelings. I'm not accusing them of anything. Poor little boys. It must be painful to be that fearful that you have to go and threaten not only a governor, but a woman. Going to take her to where? Ohio? No, Wisconsin, and try her and then lynch her or something like that. It's intense. So observing that is important. I mean, the momentum of that kind of situation is too far along the line for you to go in and try to take your own AK-47 in and aim it at them and tell them to back down. Going that direction is not so good. Probably you already know that. But you can, it's already, the momentum is there. The rocks are already coming down the hill. And relatively speaking, and relatively acting, and relatively receiving, you might not be able to do much there unless your ego is at stake, where you have to look like someone who's doing something. It's like when somebody comes and scolds you because you're not doing what they think you should do. And that's shows up everywhere. Shows up at work. Shows up in families. Especially shows up with parents who are with good intentions or trying to train their children without training their own mind. They're just going to use their ideas and concepts because they think they know more than the children. Look into the eyes of a 4-year-old and receive. And then slowly, if you look into the eyes of that 4-year-old, as they slowly grow up, you'll notice kind of a glaze comes over that. And part of that is when I say part, of course, it's dependently arisen. It has to do with everything. There isn't anything, you can't leave anything out. You can't leave out the hairs on a cat. Every time a whisker moves, everything moves. It's not magical thinking, it's just that.
You brought up how we might have to resonate with that punched your hand.
I mean, like this?
Yeah, like that.
Let me do it again.
And when I would do that with like the capital situation, I can relate to and understand like their kind of hero mentality, like they're protecting the Constitution, and I can almost get behind it. So how can we see that is actually covering up fear when it looks like heroism?
Exactly, you're saying it. That's how it's done. Just train your mind and see it. You don't have to do anything with it. If you have, that's why I say over and over again, don't do anything unless you have to. But if you have to, then do it as well as you can, whatever it may be. It's situational. You can't do it out of a particular protocol, even though we have forms and laws. But when those laws sometimes those laws and those forms become cages, and suddenly we find that the very thing we're trying to protect is actually being destroyed. So we have to operate out of our awareness rather than out of our thinking process. Most of the world is not doing that.
Sound Valley.
Go ahead, Sonu. Go ahead.
I know some people who, for you mentioned cages, they might say things and feel very passionately like those kids deserve to be in cages, their parents deserve to be punished. And I have extraordinary passion and aggression that come up when people say those sorts of things and maybe even reify those statements with their votes. How do we receive that level of, I don't even know what to call it, from people?
So here again, I think it's I would say don't do anything. You could receive it insofar as you can. But it would depend quite a bit on the situation, on just so many, how old is the person? How well do you know them? Are they saying this, yelling this in your ear? Is this coming to you? There seem to be some trepidation in their voice as they're talking about this. I'm just naming one of 500 things. So I would say if you're on receive and you're not only receiving everything that is reactionary in your mind about what they're saying, but receive everything, receive it all. And then if any action needs to come up, it will show up. And the action might be something as simple. And I mean, this is not a recommendation. You don't have to do what I'm about to say to you. I'm just saying this is something that could show up. You might say, that must be difficult to feel like that. It must be difficult for you to feel like that. You wouldn't want to emphasize it too much, then it sounds like you're mocking them. And you may be. So insofar as you can, be as genuine as you can, and realize that they're suffering too. They're suffering, and then this is since they relatively don't have any help that would help them fundamentally when they were 3 or 4 years old, or 15 or 25, or last week. Everyone communicates through some kind of opposition or warfare or anything. Our sports are full of it. Not wrong. I'm not saying people shouldn't play sports. I'm just saying be aware of what that's about. Because when it gets out of hand, then you have people in the sports arena, like in some areas, it's not coming to mind right away, where I've seen actual fights break out between soccer teams.
Kevin Bowing,
Yes, Kevin.
you mentioned that we might need to feel as badly as those we're opposition to. Is that compassion? Bowing.
I think that's the way compassion starts. It's not feeling for someone. It's feeling, you could say, feeling with them to actually resonate. So sometimes to feel with someone who is in a lot of pain and suffering, we actually start to feel like that in a way. And so, but then someone else who is also feeling terrible, but their expression of it is different. It's not just the obvious kind of helpless pain that one goes through, let's say in a hospital bed or something, or through a marriage breakup, or losing a wife or a husband or a child or something. That's the resonance there. But when someone is they're suffering and their reaction is something that is more warlike, then instead of resonating with that and feeling what that's like, then to feel with. It's not feeling for. Feeling for goes into feeling sorry for someone. It's a highly polished form of ego. And so it's not identical, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, feeling with something, feeling sorry for someone, feeling sympathy. I'm not against that. I'm just saying that it can be.
Sokuzan bowing. As it regards our practice, the precepts and the forms, you say just observe. So what is observing in the context of duty?
Just observe the form of, when I say your civic duty, I'm just saying it is, if you're listening to me, and which you are, I would say then train your mind. And that's going to show up in lots of different forms. And this doesn't mean, as I said initially, it's not about going to a mountaintop. Some people want to get away from everything and some people go into retreat and just love retreat because they don't have to deal with anybody. And they see that as meditating. I see it as extreme narcissism. Hiding out from everyone, hiding out. It's classically called a Pratyeka. Mike, is somebody in your room saying things more interesting than what I'm saying? I think I got a lot of competition there from the way you're grinning and laughing. Having more fun than we're having.
Kevin Bowing,
Go ahead, Kevin.
regarding our meditation practice, you suggest that we don't suggest it to others, make them drag it out of us. But in terms of our civic duty, should we be advocating that others also vote or engage bowing?
I think that's so situational. I'm doing it here. I've done it a little bit in the past, but this is specific. We're 2 days away, and if you watch any of the interviews with people, which some of the news reporters have been very good at trying to include as many people as possible, it's astonishing the way people describe the way that their fear manifests as needing to align themselves with someone who is successful relatively at dealing with their fear by being outlandishly narcissistic. And so, as I've said before, that everyone's walking around with a little bit of that in their lower levels, which I'll call sometimes jokingly and sometimes not so jokingly, the 13th century. You're not separate from anybody, anywhere, anytime. Even your past life isn't your past life. It doesn't belong to you. Nothing belongs to you. So I would say there may be times when you would say, even though I've said don't do this, there may be times when you would do just the opposite of that. No, this isn't a time when this particular situation, I need to tell this person something, or I need to say that. But it needs to come out of the situation. And if you're already doing a lot of mind training, if you're already training your mind a lot, you might not feel particularly awake or enlightened or whatever. But you'll notice a lot of times the feeling of being more clear about something comes up in relationship. Like you may not be so clear about your own neurosis because your idea of clarity is a misunderstanding. It's not conventional understanding. Clarity is always about confusion. You can't be clear about clarity. There's only one way you can be clear about clarity, and that's when there isn't anything else. But the path quality has to do with being clear about confusion. This is what the Buddha saw. So that's not only your own lack of clarity or confusion, but sometimes when you're actually feeling that, experiencing that, seeing that, how you don't really know, that's the best time to really relate to someone else who also doesn't really know, except the way they express it is different than you. You're actually saying, I don't really know, because you're a meditator. And with them, they're actually turning away from that through violence, or through sadness, or through depression, or through anxiety, or the 15 or 20 other dynamics that happen in the mind when fear starts to arise. Some people shut down through anger. Some people shut down through, some people shut down through not voting. I'm not going to participate in that. You can hear that intense self-centeredness come out of that. But self-centeredness shows up in lots of different ways. It shows up as apparent relative strength and apparent relative weakness. It can show up either way. More about that, Kevin?
No, Bauer.
Go ahead, son. Go ahead, son.
I have a two-part question, if it makes sense.
Give
But
me
the
the second
first
part
part
first.
is
Give me the second
when
part
we
first. Second part
when we-
first, please. Second part.
What?
I'm just having fun. Go ahead, do it.
Oh, I'm sorry, my robot was interrupting you. Okay, so my first part here is, if we disagree with someone profoundly, what is our best way of supporting them?
So there again, it's situational. It depends on who they are, how well you know them, and all the things that I can't even go into it. But insofar as you can, don't abandon them, and don't join them. And what's the other one?
The other part of the question?
No, the other part of the three poisons.
You said abandon, join, or I don't know, maybe ignore or correct.
That might work for you. Good. So don't do any of those. And so with each person, that's going to show up a little bit differently. One situation might actually talk to them. You might actually even console them. And not to be sarcastic, but you come in and says, that must be a horrible thing to be going through. And they might be kind of shocked that you're taking that approach. So I think it's, and again, I don't mean to give you a response that's always the same. It's situational. So, but it does have that quality to it. And there are some areas through your sitting practice, as I think I said a moment ago, when you feel the least secure about your own emotional dynamic, you might be the most clear about someone else's. And why? Because fundamentally, that's with a capital F, by the way, fundamentally, we're not separate. We just look that way. And when you realize you're not, I'm not saying you become a mind reader, but there aren't a lot of minds anymore. There's just mind. And some people are more, it's more obvious the way in which they're confused. And others, it's not so obvious. So I say don't do anything unless you have to. That being said, not to let you off the hook completely, the very time when you feel the most kind of flummoxed by the whole thing might be the time to actually relate to the person more directly. And here again, I would have to know what the content was to be able to come in and this is talked about a little bit in the four karmas of magnetizing, enriching, or pacifying, magnetizing, enriching, and destroying. Just 4 different ways of dealing with any kind of energy in front of you. Try to calm it down, try to fluff it up, try to buff elbows with it, or just rip its head off. Sorry for being so tantric. But I'm just saying you may need to be direct and sincere and honest with any situation that comes up. I'm not giving you permission to kill people. It's a misunderstanding for sure. But I'm just saying there may be a few dead bodies in your path, which may be people's opinions and ideas. You could actually help someone work with that situation if you're very clear about the way in which you are prejudiced. You're not going to be able to work with prejudice if you keep you, me, I, any of us start thinking we're not prejudiced. That kind of a conclusion is the very nature of prejudice. I'm not prejudiced. I'm not aggressive. I'm not clinging. I'm not grasping. What did somebody accuse me of clinging to recently?
The Peloponnesian Wars.
Oh yeah, somebody. I think it was David. Somebody comes up on the Open Heart Project. Sent me a poem. I can't remember. David Drucker. Yeah, he sent me a very, very interesting writing. Obviously, a very scholarly fellow. But he in his introductory part, kind of accused me of clinging to the Peloponnesian War. I am the Peloponnesian War. And so are you. And I am clinging to it.
Goes on by.
Yes.
Sheldon has a question in the chat box.
Go ahead, Sheldon.
He says, the current state of our political climate has divided many of us from our friends and families. We don't agree with them and maybe begin to ignore them altogether. You often tell us that we should support our friends and families in what they need to do. How can we support them if we don't agree with their ideas and opinions?
There again, situational, depends on who, what, where. I mean, it's pretty hard to disregard your mom. It's pretty hard to, if it's a relative or a neighbor, someone that lives next door, or someone that lives in an apartment in the same building you're in. There's all kinds of ways to do that. I would say just as little as possible, because if there's no openness there, then you can't do anything with it, because it immediately turns out to be anything you do, they need an enemy, because they can't handle the aggression in their own heart. They need an enemy. And that's what a lot of this is about all over the country. This is just a cycle. That's why I use Peloponnesian War. I could as easily use any war, anytime. Civil War. That was a really polarized one. And there was as they say, somebody said, there's good people on both sides. It's just it's so stupid that it's true, because the motivation behind making that kind of a determination is about controlling people, not about making a comment on the fundamental nature of reality. So don't do much with it. Don't do much with it. Don't give yourself a hard time because you're not doing some kind of appropriate thing. You don't have to ignore them. We can, touch base every now and then. How's it going? How's things going for you? And they might come back and say, you know exactly how it is for me. They're kind of indignant because you're not acknowledging, 24/7 the terrible thing they're going through. And if that happens, then just receive that. You could even apologize once. One apology is fine. Two apologies is more about you.
Junshu bowing. There are a few questions on YouTube.
Okay, go ahead.
First from Josh in Kalamazoo.
Yes.
Says, civic policies appear to be run by people dominated by an untrained mind to control others. Why join in, especially in voting, when the cushion tells me to not do anything?
Well, I'm telling you to vote, and I invented the cushion. I'm being silly, but I'm just saying you need to participate in the situation that you're in. You don't want to abandon, but you don't necessarily have to participate in that in a way that is necessarily supportive. You have to be. We can have an ideal, and we can have opinions and ideas, but when it comes down to something like this, we probably need to participate in a system that is basically messed up. So I'm happy to take a further question in that area, Josh, if you have it. But you should be voting. Don't be some kind of idealist who's going to just run to the mountaintop, even though the mountaintop is in your meditation room. Vote later, but vote. Not too much later.
Junshu bowing. A question from Shane in Virginia.
Jane.
How do you work with your civic duty if you're not allowed to vote or hold office? Bowing.
Well, it's the particular situation that someone is in. Not much you can do about that. But again, I hate to keep going back to the situational thing, but it would be how does that work? It just goes back and forth. There's some kind of internecine warfare is going on with political parties and everything. It's just painful to watch it, but also we feel like we really need to watch, especially because this whole country could turn into a third world, a nation with a dictator. Very easily could happen in the next few days. It's possible. And but we've been fighting wars. My father at age 26 was killed in the Second World War, and he did not want to go, but they didn't have a resistor kind of thing going on, so he had to go. So does that make him a hero? And somebody says to me, "Thank you for your service," that irritates me because it's about the person who's saying that. It's not about anything I did. So it's irritating. I'm not going to say anything about it other than right now. I get to say something about it. So as far as someone who can't, because of whatever, they can't vote because of their background or because of their status in some different way, I would just say find some way to do it. Find some way to help others. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could be just a little bit. And there's different ways to do that, different ways that it shows up. The important thing I think that we do, whether you're a meditator or not, or whether you never meditate again, is find some way to put the others before yourself. Some people do that with their job. Because they want to do that, they become nurses, they become doctors, they become therapists, and sometimes that's what we do. That's what we can do. Don't know what else to do. Further question on YouTube, Junshu?
A question from Hakaran.
Okay.
Ultimately, is there ever a wrong action?
Only relatively. There's no wrong actions ultimately. Ultimately, there is no action. And that's not something you can understand with the mind that is constantly looking and dealing with any kind of logic, whether it's even threefold logic, any kind of this and that or up and down, back and forth, all the things that we use to shuffle around to try to manipulate or control or protect us and so on. But relatively, there is. Are there any more questions on, any questions here? Go ahead, excuse me, Ondo.
What can help us discern whether something really is our civic duty? And is there an emotion or some internal message that we can pay attention to? Bowing.
I don't know, there might be, and again, dependent, someone who's meditating a lot, someone who is clear, the choices between this and that, should I or shouldn't I, when it comes to that kind of thing, I say less is better. Don't do anything, because probably you're not to that area of the hallway or the forest floor where you actually see the causes and conditions that would let you know what's a good path to take. Until that time, it always looks like this or that, this or that. And so the sitting practice of meditation and training the awareness to see clearly what is coming and what is going, what is rising, what is falling away, helps us to see that what needs to be done will become obvious if we hold our horses a little bit. It doesn't come when it comes to something like voting. We can't do that. We have to get this done, and so you just do the best you can because you are being forced to do it on a certain. You're doing it within a certain framework, and to not do it means that you're completely left out of the situation. But as far as civic duty, I would say don't abandon not only your family, your biological family, your spiritual community, your sangha, or the city, the country, the state, the nation. That doesn't mean you have to be involved in everything, but just watch what's happening. Be aware of what's happening in that area if you can. It's difficult because it's such a labyrinth. I mean, you're just trying to find out who the senators are in your state, and they don't make that obvious anymore. You notice that all the political signs, none of them say Democrat or Republican. If you do see one that says that, it's unusual because that has become something that doesn't sell or doesn't show up so well. So things it's so very complicated, and the reason I say less is better. That if you don't conclude, then there's always kind of an openness, which doesn't feel very good to ego. An openness to like the feeling of I don't know what to do. I would say good. Don't conclude anything, and then the conclusion that needs to come about because you haven't concluded anything and covered up out of not liking to not know what to do, or some kind of fear of the future, or fear of not controlling things at the right time. So it is a kind of lack of trust in your world and in your situation based on fear. So I would say less is better. But you're already connected into the community. I have been for years as a therapist. So in your particular situation, you're working with people, dealing with all kinds of issues, and drug issues and everything. So you're more connected than most people are. But maybe you're asking me in a different way, or like, is there something else you should be doing?
Oh, no, Bowing. I'm just wondering, since I'm on the path, is there an amount of time that I should be on the path? And instead of trusting my own judgment, should I be trusting the teacher's judgment or some other?
I would say since you've received precepts, right now you're living in a monastery, I would say you should give the teacher the benefit of the doubt, kind of like you're doing now. I don't function like teachers in ancient times where you had everything the teacher says that I will do. That's a Tibetan kind of And it might have been necessary in the 15th century to function in that way because of the social structure, but not anymore. Just like we don't have to have nuns. It's a silly idea, but it probably worked in ancient times because of the incredible prejudice against and division between the difference between men and women. It's still there, but it's receding.
Wunderbar. It seems like if, in my case, I would do nothing ever.
You would do nothing ever if
yeah.
what?
Because I would always be waiting for some sort of indication that this is the right decision.
Haven't you noticed I tell you what to do? Several occasions. And I have several students I never tell them what to do. But in your situation, I might have told you what to do twice. Are you counting? Yeah. 2 times I've said, because that's why it's necessary to have a teacher, not because you need the teacher forever. Trungpa Rinpoche even says you need a teacher so you can leave the teacher. You need the teacher so you can be a student and be taught so that you can, this doesn't mean you would never talk to the teacher again. It's just that you no longer function. You understand that everything is a teacher and you're always a student. But you might need to run into that kind of a dynamic. I certainly did. It was painful and difficult for me 45 years ago or whatever it was. So it's so different with each person. That's why I'm very biased. I think it's necessary to have a strong spiritual path. Otherwise, the mundane path will just usurp it will use your passion, aggression, ignorance to control you, control others. Just like if you watch, there's a law about militias. You can have a militia as long as you can get together with guns and everything, but you can't march in formation. A good idea, because marching in formation is called esprit de corps, the spirit of a unit. And it locks you right into that. And when you do everything on command with everybody else over and over and over, you get conditioned to just follow orders without thinking. And that's what the people who want to control the world want you to do. That's why they have armies and so on. And then that shows up somewhat in the Buddhist tradition of trying to get all of the monks and all the people to obey. I just don't care for that. More? Further questions?
Junchi bowing.
Yes.
Another question from Josh in Kalamazoo.
Yes.
Is voting a conclusion if you pick one person over another?
Of course. You had to ask me that? Of course it is. When I say don't conclude, I know you can't help but conclude. But when I say don't conclude, I'm saying this, if you're listening to me and you consider yourself, a part-time student or whatever you consider yourself, you will look more closely at the way in which you conclude. And why am I saying that? It's about awareness of conclusion. It's not about stopping that. Then, if there's a lot of awareness around the conclusion, then you'll notice that sometimes you're going to need to you not only need to conclude, you just have to conclude. And other times that you could wait a while before you make any conclusion there. You might find you never make a conclusion there because there's never enough, evidence maybe for going this way or going that way. But yeah, it's a concluding. This doesn't mean you shouldn't try to see which direction should I go there. And sometimes both directions, as has been in the political situation, is like, that's why it's so disappointing to see 2 people running for office and are both confused in different ways and have aligned themselves with huge corporations which want to be people because they're billionaires. Painful to see that. I don't know. That's probably enough said right there. You do it. You look at it. You train your mind. You realize who you are. I know who you are. I don't have any doubts about that at all. I know that you're not separate from anything else, anybody else. There aren't 2 separate things anywhere. It's just amazing you can even make a peace sign. Not two separate things. I'm not saying they aren't separated. They're incredibly separated. The floor is quite separated. This floor right here is quite separate from the moon.
Downhill power.
Yes, sir.
If we say that both sides are confused in different ways, I voted, I came to a conclusion, but what's the point?
What's the point of what?
What's the point of voting if they're both confused?
Well, one's confused about how much ketchup to put in the spaghetti, and the other one's confused about whose throat to slit. So I think it's pretty powerful contrast. But let's just keep the ship afloat, because some people want to sink it. And they want to sink it because they want their own ship and they want you to be on one of the oars. I mean, I'm being a little bit silly with it, but that's what it's about. That's what's happening in South America, different places in Europe, in Poland. If you follow the news, which you should at least look at it a little bit, it's pretty volatile. This doesn't mean we need to hide out on the mountaintop or hide out in the monastery. Go in, train your mindset, and then interact. Just like you're training to be an attorney, and at some point, I know from talking to you, you want to help people who are incarcerated, help people who are on the difficult end of the spectrum as far as human beings in the United States. So I think that's a good idea. But when you say, what's the point? I'm just saying it's because of the contrast. That's the point. Is that helpful, or are you walking away chuckling?
No, that's extremely helpful. Yeah, thank you. I had that feeling, but people have asked me if both sides are confused, and at the same time you can see some points to both sides. Well, then why would you bother voting? It doesn't make a difference in the end. And so, yeah, your response is very helpful to put that answer into words. Thank you.
Makes a whole lot of difference. And that's if things will be peachy keen if Democrats get in, but probably will be. People are more interested in other human beings there. It's more of a humanitarian thing rather than saying some people. It's an extreme racism. It's horrible, but it's covered up with all kinds of fancy ideas and people who are good at manipulating words and concepts and judging and evaluating. And it's quite sickening. I mean, literally sickening sometimes. I'm sure some of you would maybe concur with that. But the way to work with this is work with it as a structure that's been set up for hundreds of years. Let's just try to protect that balance, which is just about keeping a roof on the building and keeping the foundations from being eaten away by a giant lizard with orange hair. And you can tell that I don't have any opinions on anything. It's not about not having opinions. It's about knowing that they are conditionally based. Everything is based on conditions. So the whole idea of right and wrong is a misunderstanding. That doesn't mean that you don't see the difference between a snake and a bunny rabbit. There's a difference. And please, if this isn't clear, if there's something I don't want you to particularly walk away from this and just immediately go to the cushion and feel all disturbed because Sokuzan's giving you a headache. If you have a question about this that you can bring into words and ask, I'm delighted to respond. I might say I don't know, but I still want the question. The question not only will help you, possibly, it will help me as a teacher, and it may help somebody who doesn't know how to ask that question.
Teresa Bowen.
Teresa.
Are there ever times that it's helpful to be a conscientious objector? Ellen?
You could. I think there's times for everything, so you could do that. I think as I mentioned, my father, who was killed in the Second World War in Germany, I think he, if there had been a structure there that he knew about, I think he might have done that. From what his, from what my mother said. So Corinne, you have a question?
So Corinne bowing. Sometimes duty is tiring. Is duty tiring to you? Bowing.
I don't think the duty part of it, or the because it's pretty choiceless. So I'm not doing it because it's a duty. It's like I don't want to do that, but since it's my duty, I'll do it. I just find myself doing it, and it's more tiring for me to walk from the hojo and come and sit on this tan than it is for me to talk to people about their minds or answer questions. It's more tiring, but that might have to do with just being an old person, perhaps, but not particularly tiring. I'm kind of delighted that I'm still here, that I didn't vanish. I'm still able to do this and support people in finding out who they are. As you've heard me say, perhaps it's Buddhism, of course, and it's Zen, and of course, and it's Tibetan Buddhism, of course, and it's all the other things that I talk about with here and with others and so on. But it's not, we don't have to lock down on anything. We need some forms, but the forms are to be observed, not obeyed like, the code of uniform code of military justice. It's not that kind of, we don't need that kind of control. That's why people can come and go. People may need to do some of this, maybe for a year or two, and then maybe do something else. I don't know. If, as I've said, kind of jokingly, but not exactly, it's just if I were to tell you my idealistic approach here is everybody should fully ordain as monks, and everything, the whole world should be a huge monastery. Other than that, we're going to continue to spin. And even if we do that, there's going to be a lot of spinning. It'll just have, it'll have forms around it that are forms that understand what's happening rather than are trying to control what's happening. At least that's how I see it. But again, with when the duty part seems tiring, this is a dharma gate. If you're feeling this is a dharma gate, in other words, it's a door into the truth of what is obstructing your fundamental nature, and it has to do with the paramita of energy. It's just to be observed. You don't have to crank up any energy. Just notice that it's challenging or it's difficult, and notice that if you don't fluff it up, you don't do anything with it to make it more understandable, or you don't lecture yourself about it. I shouldn't feel that way. That's probably not the worst thing, but that's a difficult area because it causes it to go in circles. It'll disappear a little bit and then it'll come back. It's circular, and so it needs to be a very straightforward going right into the dark. Go into the dark. Go into the darkness that is being covered up by that word. Duty is tiring. Sometimes duty is tiring. And see what's actually happening there. Do it with the awareness rather than with the thinking process or with the commentary or with the little sentence that might show up. I've noticed that if I'm doing several interviews in the afternoon or something, I notice that when I'm in the interview, I'm all about that interview. I'm all about it. There's no feeling of, anything being a duty or being anything other than I'm just talking to somebody. But between the interviews, sometimes I just go take a nap because I'm exhausted. Literally, that's how I feel. I'm just tired out. But then when it's time for the next interview, because I do it with people, I'm kind of a energy vampire. So I mean this sincerely. I do, when I talk to you, any one of you, when I talk to you, I get energy from the communication, because it's so very important. When I say it's important, it's relatively important, of course, but it's ultimately important. Relatively might be helpful, might not be. This might be your path. I might be your teacher. I might not be. I don't have any propaganda particularly about me and my style. Not political. Any further questions? So it was all that clear, huh? There's no questions. It's pretty clear. Okay. Dedicate the merit. Yeah, I guess it was on there quite a while. Say, Mike Young, you hear me? Send me your, text me your address. I got something for you. Do I need this?
No.
I guess I wanted 2 sticks instead of 1. There we go.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shifu, shison bu samoko sa, oko hoja horobi, the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.